No one in that emergency room understood the silence. The monitors were screaming. The clock on the wall was bleeding seconds. Doctors were arguing in clipped, frustrated tones. And on the gurney lay a man who should have been unconscious but wasn't. His eyes were open, sharp, measuring everyone who came near him. 18 doctors stepped forward that night. 18 credentials. 18 confident hands reaching for consent forms, IV lines, scalpels. He rejected every single one. Not with panic, not with fear. With calm, deliberate refusal. Then a rookie nurse, barely out of training, barely noticed, leaned close and whispered a single sentence. A sentence no civilian should know. A phrase spoken only in places where mistakes cost lives. The room went quiet. The wounded man finally moved. He turned his head toward her, and for the first time he said one word, yes. Before the story begins, tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And if stories about hidden courage earned respect and quiet heroism pull you in, consider subscribing. The next moments changed everything. The helicopter's rotors were still winding down when the trauma bay doors slammed open. Rainwater streaked across the floor as paramedics rushed the gurney inside, shouting vitals over the roar of the ER. The man on the stretcher was tall, even while lying flat, his body rigid with discipline rather than pain. Blood soaked through the dark fabric, clinging to his torso, spreading in uneven patterns that told a trained eye this wasn't a clean wound. This was layered, complicated, violent. Male, mid-30s, one paramedic called out. Gunshot wound, possible internal bleeding. BP unstable. Pulse rapid but strong. Patient is conscious. Extremely uncooperative. That last part drew irritated looks. Dr. Marcus Hale, the attending trauma physician, stepped forward with authority earned from 2 decades in emergency medicine. He glanced once at the wound, once at the patient's face, and made a quick assessment. The eyes. That was the first thing. They weren't glassy. They weren't unfocused. They were alert in a way that didn't belong on a gurney. Sir Hale said, firmly snapping on gloves. "I'm Dr. Hale. We need to get you into surgery immediately." The man didn't answer. Instead, his gaze moved slow, controlled across the room. He tracked the nurses, the techs, the exits. His jaw clenched once, then relaxed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, and completely at odds with the chaos around him. "Not yet." Hale blinked. "Excuse me." The patient's eyes returned to him. "I said not yet." A murmur rippled through the trauma bay. Hale leaned closer, lowering his voice the way doctors did when they assumed fear or shock. "You're bleeding internally. You don't get to delay this." The man inhaled carefully, as if measuring the cost of every breath. "I do," he said, "and I will." Hale straightened, irritation flashing across his face. "What's your name?" A pause. "Then Ethan Cole." "All right, Ethan," Hale said, already signaling for imaging. "We're going to no scans." Ethan interrupted. That stopped the room cold. "No scans," Hale repeated. "That's not a suggestion. That's protocol." Ethan's lips tightened. "Your protocol isn't mine." Hale stared at him for a long second, then nodded sharply. "We'll come back to that." But inside, something prickled. Patients in shock argued. Patients in pain lashed out. But this man wasn't panicking. He was evaluating. The doors swung open again as another doctor entered vascular surgery, this time summoned by the location of the wound. She introduced herself quickly, efficiently, and reached for the chart. Ethan watched her hands. Not her face, her hands. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked suddenly. The doctor paused. "Excuse me, vascular surgery," Ethan clarified. "How long?" 13 years, she replied, bristling. "And right now, where did you train?" A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Johns Hopkins." "Why does that matter?" Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then shook his head. "Not you." The doctor recoiled as if struck. "That's enough," Hale snapped. "Sir, you're not in a position to interview your care team." Ethan's eyes opened again, hard now. "Then don't put the wrong ones in front of me." A nurse tried to insert an IV. Ethan's hand shot out lightning fast, gripping her wrist, just enough to stop her, not hurt her. "Ask first," he said quietly. The room froze. Hale felt it then. That subtle shift in the air when authority slipped. When everyone realized they weren't fully in control. "Security," Hale muttered. But before anyone could move, Ethan released the nurse and let his arm fall back to the gurney. His breathing had grown shallower. A monitor beeped faster. "I'm not your enemy," Ethan said, "but I won't let the wrong person cut me open. And how exactly do you plan to survive?" Hale shot back. "If you keep refusing help," Ethan met his gaze. By choosing it carefully, they wheeled him into imaging anyway, despite his protests, despite his refusal to sign consent. The scan confirmed what Hale had feared: internal bleeding near the liver fragments, dangerously close to major vessels. Ethan studied the images when they were brought to him, his expression unreadable. "You need surgery," Hale said flatly. "Now." Ethan nodded once. Hale gestured to a colleague, another surgeon, this one older, with a reputation for brilliance and ego in equal measure. The man stepped forward confidently, rattling off credentials before even reaching the gurney. Ethan listened, asked 2 questions, then said no. The second doctor followed, then a third. Each time, Ethan's process was the same. A few questions, a pause, a decision, no emotion, no explanation. By the 6th rejection, frustration boiled over. "This is absurd," one surgeon snapped. "He's not fit to decide." Hale clenched his jaw. "He's conscious, oriented. He has the right. Then he's choosing to die," the surgeon shot back. Ethan heard that. "Wrong," he said quietly. "I'm choosing who doesn't kill me." The words hung heavy. By the time the 12th doctor walked away, the trauma bay felt smaller, tighter. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing minute. Hale stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, staring down at a man who was bleeding out while calmly rejecting the very people meant to save him. "You're running out of time," Hale said. "Whatever you think you're doing, this isn't a game." Ethan's vision blurred at the edges, but his focus never left Hale's face. Neither is trust. Hale opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because beneath the stubbornness, beneath the defiance, he saw something else. Fear, but not for himself. It was the fear of a man guarding a line he couldn't afford to let anyone cross. As the 13th doctor was called in, Ethan's grip tightened on the gurney rails. His pulse spiked. Somewhere deep inside him, alarms were going off, not medical ones. The kind that had kept him alive long before this room. And somewhere in the ER, unnoticed and unheard, a rookie nurse paused in her work and felt the strange, unmistakable pull of something about to break. By the time the 14th doctor stepped into the trauma bay, the tension had become physical. It pressed against the walls, settled into shoulders, tightened jaws. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked fabric, and something sharper, fear disguised as professional frustration. Every monitor beep felt louder, now accusatory, counting down the minutes Ethan Cole was stealing from himself. Dr. Leonard Brooks arrived with an entourage, grey-haired, broad-shouldered, and carrying the unmistakable confidence of someone who had never been told no in an operating room. Brooks didn't ask questions when he entered. He glanced at the chart, the scans, and then at Ethan. "I'll take this one," Brooks said, already pulling on gloves. "Prep him for surgery." Ethan watched him approach. Not his face, his gait, the way he stood just slightly too close to the bed, claiming space without permission. "How many mass casualty events?" Ethan asked. Brooks paused, annoyed. "What real ones?" Ethan clarified. "Not simulations, not scheduled ORs, chaos, blood everywhere, no backup." Brooks scoffed. "I don't see how." "Answer the question." A nurse froze mid-motion. Hale felt his temper spike. "Sir Hale warned, this is Dr. Brooks. He's saved hundreds of lives." Ethan nodded once. "I'm sure he has." Brooks bristled. "I've operated in conditions you wouldn't survive." Ethan's eyes flicked up sharp. "Then tell me what you did when your primary light source failed and you lost suction at the same time." Brooks hesitated. "Just a beat." But it was enough. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Not you." Brooks' face flushed red. "This is ridiculous." He tore off his gloves and stormed out. The 15th doctor lasted less than 2 minutes. The 16th didn't even finish introducing herself before Ethan cut her off with a single look and a shake of his head. By now, word had spread across the ER. Staff lingered near the trauma bay doors, pretending to be busy while listening. Some whispered theories, mental trauma, paranoia, drugs. Others stayed silent, unsettled by how deliberate Ethan's refusals were. This wasn't confusion, it was selection. "Doctor." Hale stood at the bedside again, his authority eroding with every passing second. "You're not screening for a surgeon," Hale said tightly. "You're screening for something else." "What is it?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His breathing had grown uneven. Sweat beaded along his temples. His hand trembled briefly before he clenched it into a fist. "I need someone who knows what it means," he said finally, voice low, "to make decisions when the cost isn't theoretical." Hale stared at him. "This is a hospital, not a battlefield." Ethan met his gaze. "That's where you're wrong." The 17th Doctor arrived young, eager, desperate to prove himself. He spoke too fast, over-explained, tried to reassure Ethan with statistics and success rates. Ethan let him talk, then asked one question. "When your patient is conscious but wrong, do you correct them or comply?" The doctor blinked. "Excuse me," Ethan closed his eyes. "Not you." By the time the 18th Doctor stepped back in frustration, the room had reached a breaking point. Hale turned away from the bed, rubbing his face with both hands. He'd never experienced anything like this. Every instinct screamed at him to override Ethan's refusal, sedate him and rush him to surgery. But something stopped him. It was the way Ethan endured the pain. No theatrics, no bargaining, just grit. "Why?" Hale asked, suddenly turning back. "Why go through all this? Why test everyone?" Ethan's jaw tightened. For a moment, Hale thought he wouldn't answer. Then Ethan spoke quieter than before. "Because if I'm wrong," he said, "people die." Hale's chest tightened. Who Ethan didn't respond. A monitor beeped sharply. Blood pressure dipped again. A nurse called out the numbers. Hale snapped back into motion, barking orders, adjusting medication. For a brief moment, the argument was drowned out by urgency. Ethan gasped as pain tore through his abdomen, white-hot and relentless. His vision blurred, the edges darkening. He focused on one thing, staying conscious, because the moment he slipped, the choice would be taken from him. Across the room, a young nurse paused at the supply cart. Emily Carter had been trying not to stare all night. She was new, fresh scrubs, hair pulled back too tightly as if afraid of making a wrong impression. She'd been assigned to fetch equipment, restock trays, stay out of the way. But she'd seen things. The way Ethan scanned the room, the way his questions weren't random, but precise, the way his refusals weren't disrespectful, just final. She'd noticed something else, too. Every time a doctor raised their voice, Ethan's muscles tensed. Every time someone spoke calmly, evenly, his shoulders eased just a fraction. Emily swallowed. She wasn't supposed to interfere. She wasn't supposed to question doctors, especially on her first weeks in the ER. But something about this didn't feel like defiance. It felt like survival. Ethan's breathing hitched again. He clenched his jaw, fighting a groan. "Time," Hale muttered. "We're losing him." Emily's heart pounded. She remembered her grandmother's words, spoken years ago, spoken quietly, spoken with respect. "Listen before you act. The quiet ones are telling you the most." Ethan shifted slightly on the gurney pane, forcing a sound from his throat, a low, involuntary exhale. And with it, something else. A whisper, so faint it was almost lost beneath the beeping monitors. Almost. Emily froze. She turned her head slowly, every instinct screaming at her to pay attention. Ethan's lips moved again. This time she heard it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a name. It was a phrase. Fragmented, coded, utterly out of place in a civilian hospital. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled, because she knew that phrase, and she knew exactly where it came from. Emily Carter forced herself to keep moving. That was the first rule she'd learned in the ER, when the room felt like it was closing in, when emotions spiked and authority collided. You didn't freeze. You found something useful to do. You stayed small, invisible if necessary. She picked up a tray of saline bags and crossed the trauma bay with measured steps, her face carefully neutral. Inside, her heart was pounding so hard she was certain someone could hear it over the monitors. She had heard the phrase, not clearly, not perfectly, but enough to recognize the rhythm. It wasn't English in the normal sense. It was clipped, abbreviated, stripped down to essentials. A sentence built not to be poetic but to be precise, the kind of language designed to travel fast through chaos. Emily had heard it once before, years ago, in a place that never appeared on her resume. She pushed the memory away and focused on the present. Ethan Cole lay on the gurney, his color worsening by the minute. The confidence that had anchored him earlier was beginning to crack, not in his will but in his body. His fingers flexed intermittently, a tell Emily recognized immediately. Pain management-trained nurses watched for grimaces, tears, verbal cues. Combat-trained medics watched hands. Dr. Hale stood at the foot of the bed again, shoulders squared, jaw tight. "Prep for sedation," he said. "We don't have any more time to indulge this." A nurse hesitated. "He's still refusing consent." Hale exhaled sharply. "He's not refusing because he understands. He's refusing because he's compromised." Ethan turned his head just enough to look at Hale. His eyes were still sharp, but there was something new in them now. Urgency. "You do that," Ethan said quietly, "and you fail everyone." Hale snapped. "Enough." Emily stopped beside the supply cart, pretending to check labels. Her mind raced. She had been warned about moments like this during orientation. Situations where protocol collided with instinct, where the safest action on paper didn't feel safe at all. Emily was a rookie nurse in this hospital. That part was real. She was new, untested, still learning the rhythm of civilian emergency medicine, but there were parts of her training that hadn't come from textbooks. She remembered a different kind of trauma bay, one with sand underfoot, not linoleum. A place where the lights flickered, where helicopters didn't land neatly on helipads but kicked up dust and debris that coated everything. She remembered learning that trust wasn't granted by rank or title. It was earned in seconds. Emily glanced at Ethan again. He wasn't looking at the doctors anymore. He was looking at the room, at exits, at shadows, at people who weren't trying to control him. His gaze brushed past her once. Then again, it lingered just a fraction longer the second time. Emily's throat tightened. She turned away before anyone noticed, gripping the edge of the cart until her knuckles whitened. She had promised herself she wouldn't bring that part of her life into this one. She had chosen this hospital because it was quiet, civilian, predictable. She wanted to heal people without having to calculate risk the way she used to. But Ethan Cole didn't belong to predictability. Dr. Hale leaned over the bed again. "Last chance," he said. "We're doing this with or without your cooperation." Ethan swallowed the movement, visibly painful. He drew in a breath that shuddered halfway through. Then he spoke again. Softer this time. So soft it barely carried past his own lips. Emily heard it anyway. The rest of the phrase. Her world tilted. Her training kicked in before her fear could catch up. Emily set the tray down and stepped forward. "Dr. Hale," she said, her voice steady despite the way her pulse hammered in her ears. "Can I have a moment?" Hale turned sharply, irritation flaring. "This isn't the time, I know," Emily said quickly. "But I think he's trying to tell you something." The room went still. A few heads turned. Someone scoffed quietly. Hale stared at her, incredulous. "You're new, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "Then stay in your lane." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. "With respect," she said, choosing her words carefully, "he's not refusing care. He's screening for understanding." Hale laughed once harshly. Understanding what Emily hesitated. This was the moment. She could step back, let the system do what it always did, protect herself, protect her job. Or she could speak. She looked at Ethan. His eyes were on her now fully, searching, not demanding, waiting. Emily took a breath. "He's not asking who's the best surgeon," she said. "He's asking who knows what it's like to make decisions when consent isn't paperwork, it's trust." The room was silent. Hale stared at her, as if she'd spoken another language. "And you know this," how Emily swallowed. "Because I've heard that phrase before." Ethan's fingers tightened on the gurney rails. Hale's expression hardened. "This is not a guessing game." Emily stepped closer to the bed despite herself. "Sir," she said, directing the word not at Hale but at Ethan. "May I?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he gave a single, slow nod. The motion cost him. Sweat broke across his brow, but his eyes never left hers. Emily leaned in just enough that only he could hear her. She spoke quietly. Not loudly enough to be performative, not softly enough to be uncertain. She finished the phrase perfectly. Ethan sucked in a breath like a man surfacing after being underwater too long. His head turned toward her fully now. His hand lifted weak but deliberate and caught her sleeve. "Yes," he said hoarsely. The word cut through the room like a blade. Hale froze. "What did you say to him?" someone demanded. Emily straightened slowly, her heart racing. "I said the rest of his sentence." Hale looked from her to Ethan. What sentence? Ethan didn't answer. He was watching Emily with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. "For the record," he said, voice strained but clear, "she stays." Hale opened his mouth to argue. Then Ethan added, "Everyone else can wait." The monitors beeped faster. Time was still running out. But for the first time since the helicopter had landed, Ethan Cole wasn't alone in the room anymore. And Hale realized with a chill settling in his chest that the rookie nurse he'd just dismissed might be the only reason this man survived the next hour. The silence that followed Ethan's declaration was heavier than any argument that had come before it. "She stays." 3 words. Quiet. Final. Dr. Hale felt them land like a blow to the chest. Around him, the trauma bay seemed to hesitate as if the room itself was waiting for permission to keep moving. "This is not how this works," Hale said at last, his voice controlled but tight. "You don't get to dictate staff assignments." Ethan's grip on Emily's sleeve loosened his hand, dropping back to the gurney. The effort had clearly cost him. His breathing grew shallow, uneven, but his eyes never left Hale's. "I already did," Ethan said. "And you listened." A few nurses exchanged glances. One of the residents shifted uncomfortably. The unspoken truth was there for everyone to see. Hale had paused. He had hesitated, and that hesitation had changed the balance in the room. Emily stood perfectly still beside the bed, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of every eye on her. The rookie nurse who had just challenged an attending physician in front of half the ER. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clasped them together to hide it. She hadn't planned for this. She had only recognized the phrase because it had been burned into her memory years ago during training that never showed up on paperwork. Training that taught her how to keep her voice steady when everything else fell apart. Hale exhaled slowly. "You want her here?" he asked Ethan. "Fine. But this stops now. You're dying." Ethan nodded faintly. "I know. Then help us help you," Hale said. "Tell me what you're protecting." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No," Hale's patience snapped. "This is insanity. We're wasting time on riddles while your blood pressure tanks." Emily stepped forward before she could stop herself. "He's not protecting information," she said quietly. "He's protecting people." Hale rounded on her. "You don't know that." Emily met his gaze. "I know the pattern." "Pattern," Hale repeated sharply. Emily hesitated, choosing her words with care. The questions he asked the doctors weren't about skill alone. They were about decision-making under uncertainty, about whether someone freezes when the rules don't apply. Hale stared at her. "You're telling me you think this is some kind of test?" "Yes," Emily said. "And failing it means he doesn't survive long enough for the real consequences." Ethan's eyes flicked to her again. Approval, gratitude, and something else, relief. Hale looked between them, frustration etched deep into his face. "You're asking me to trust a nurse who's been here less than a month. Over 18 board-certified surgeons." Emily swallowed. "I'm asking you to trust him." The monitors beeped louder, more erratic. "BP's dropping again," a nurse called out. Hale cursed under his breath. "We don't have the luxury of philosophy." Ethan inhaled sharply, pain tearing through him again. His fingers curled, then relaxed. When he spoke, his voice was strained but steady. "Doctor," he said, "if you sedate me without understanding why I'm here, you don't just risk my life." Hale leaned in, face inches from Ethan's. "Then whose do I risk?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "Yours, hers, and people who don't even know this hospital exists." A chill ran through the room. Hale straightened slowly. "That's a threat." "No," Ethan said. "That's math." Emily felt her stomach twist. This wasn't bluffing. She had seen men speak like this before, men who carried weight not because they wanted power, but because they knew what happened when the wrong choice was made. Hale paced once, then turned back. "All right," he said sharply. "Say I humor this. Say I let you stay awake." Say I let her, he gestured at Emily, be part of this. Ethan waited. What do you need? Hale asked. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, gathering himself. Someone who understands the phrase you finished. Emily's breath caught. Hale frowned. What phrase? Ethan looked at Emily again. Ask her. All eyes turned to her. Emily felt the weight of the moment press down on her chest. This was the line she had promised herself she wouldn't cross. The line between civilian life and the world she'd left behind. But Ethan was bleeding out, and the cost of silence was too high. It's a verification phrase, Emily said slowly, used in environments where you can't afford to explain yourself. It confirms shared training and shared risk. Hale's eyes narrowed. Military, yes. That earned murmurs. Special operations, Emily added. The room went very quiet. Hale stared at Ethan, reassessing him entirely. The man's bearing, his control, the way he'd never once begged. You're a soldier, Hale said. Ethan didn't correct him. I'm on you. Soil, Hale continued. In a civilian hospital. Your mission is irrelevant here. Ethan opened his eyes. Then you don't understand the mission. Emily felt it again, that pull. The sense that this wasn't about pride or secrecy. It was about containment. What happens if the wrong surgeon operates? Hale asked. Ethan's gaze hardened. Then they learn things they shouldn't. Or they make decisions they don't understand. And the fallout doesn't stop in this room. Hale ran a hand through his hair. You expect me to accept that? On faith, Ethan shook his head weakly. No, I expect you to accept it because time is running out. Another alarm chirped. Emily stepped closer to Hale, lowering her voice. Sir, he's not asking for control. He's asking for alignment. Hale studied her face, the sincerity, the fear she was trying to hide, the certainty she couldn't. Who are you really? He asked. Emily's throat tightened. Someone who knows what it costs when trust breaks at the wrong moment. Hale looked at Ethan again. All right, he said finally. We'll do this your way. For now. Ethan exhaled slowly. But Hale added, if you lose consciousness, I take over. Ethan nodded. Fair. Hale turned to the room. Clear the bay. Minimal staff. No one speaks unless necessary. There were protests. Confusion. But Hale's authority snapped back into place, reinforced by the gravity of the moment. As people moved, Emily stayed by Ethan's side. He glanced at her again, his voice barely audible. You shouldn't have done that. Emily met his eyes. Neither should you. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Still, he said, thank you. Emily squeezed his hand gently. Don't thank me yet. The lights overhead hummed. The monitors steadied just slightly. But beneath the fragile calm, something else was building. Because agreeing to Ethan's terms was only the beginning. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, forces were already moving, drawn by the choices being made inside a single trauma bay. The trauma bay emptied faster than Emily expected. What remained felt stripped down to essentials, fewer bodies, fewer voices, fewer opinions competing for control. The overhead lights hummed softly. The monitors continued their steady, unforgiving rhythm. Every beep was a reminder that time hadn't stopped just because the argument had. Doctor. Hale stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, watching Ethan with a new kind of attention. Not irritation. Assessment. All right, Hale said. We're aligned for now, but alignment requires information. You're going to tell me exactly what you need. Ethan swallowed pain, flashing across his face. I need to stay conscious. That's not negotiable, Hale replied immediately. It is, Ethan said. And you already agreed. Hale hesitated, then nodded once. Minimal sedation. Enough to manage pain, not enough to compromise cognition. Ethan's gaze shifted to Emily. And I need her. Emily stiffened. Me. You heard the phrase, Ethan said. That means you understand the rules. Hale frowned. She's a nurse, not a surgeon. I'm aware, Ethan said calmly. She's not here to cut. She's here to listen. Emily felt a strange mix of dread and purpose settle into her chest. What exactly do you want me to listen for? She asked. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. Anything that doesn't belong. Hale exhaled sharply. You're going to have to be more specific. Ethan opened his eyes again, locking onto Hale. If someone asks questions they shouldn't know to ask. If someone tries to rush decisions they don't understand. If someone treats this like a standard case. Hale studied him. You really think someone here is a threat? Ethan didn't answer immediately. I think he said carefully that information leaks don't start with villains. They start with curiosity. Emily felt a chill. Hale glanced toward the door, then back at Ethan. You're telling me this isn't just about surviving surgery? Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. No. The monitors beeped faster for a moment as another wave of pain hit. Emily moved instinctively, adjusting medication, her hands steady despite the tension. Hale watched her work. Efficient. Quiet. No wasted motion. Where did you learn that? He asked her. Emily didn't look up. Some places don't give second chances. Hale absorbed that without comment. Ethan's breathing steadied again. He turned his head slightly toward Emily. Do you remember the rest of the protocol? Emily hesitated. I remember enough. That may have to be enough, Ethan said. Hale raised an eyebrow. Protocol. Emily glanced at him, then back at Ethan. Contingency measures. In case alignment fails. Hale's jaw tightened. You have contingencies inside my hospital. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. I have responsibilities outside it. Silence stretched. Hale finally nodded. All right. We move forward. Prep the ore. Emily's heart skipped. Or yes, Hale said. Whether he likes it or not, he's not surviving without intervention. Ethan nodded weakly. Agreed. As they prepared to move, Ethan's hand shot out again, this time not to stop anyone but to catch Emily's wrist gently. One more thing, he said. Emily leaned in. What if anyone arrives asking for me by name? Ethan said, before I tell you to expect them. Emily's breath caught. What? Get Hale. Ethan finished. And don't answer questions. Hale frowned. Who would? The distant thump of helicopter rotors cut through the air. Everyone froze. Hale turned sharply toward the ceiling. That's not ours. Emily felt the vibration through the floor, faint but unmistakable. Ethan closed his eyes. They're early, he murmured. Hale's pulse spiked. Who is they? Ethan didn't answer. The overhead speaker crackled to life. Unscheduled aircraft requesting landing clearance. No flight plan on record. Hale swore under his breath. This is getting out of hand. Ethan's voice was strained now, but calm. Doctor, if anyone from administration tries to override you, I won't, Hale said sharply. Not without answers. Ethan nodded once. Good. Emily felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. This wasn't just an emergency anymore. It was a collision between systems that didn't normally touch. As they wheeled Ethan toward the OR, the hallway lights streaked overhead. Staff stepped aside instinctively, eyes following the gurney. Word had spread. Something unusual was happening. Inside the elevator, Hale broke the silence. You tested 18 doctors, he said. What made you trust her? Ethan's eyes flicked to Emily. She didn't try to control the situation. She tried to understand it. Emily swallowed. You were whispering the phrase on purpose, weren't you? Ethan nodded faintly. I needed to know if anyone would hear it, and if no one had, Emily asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then I would have accepted the consequences. The elevator doors opened. The ore was already prepped, staff moving quickly but quietly under Hale's direction. As Ethan was transferred to the table, Emily took her place beside him, monitoring vitals, watching faces. A nurse she didn't recognize lingered near the doorway, eyes fixed on Ethan. Emily felt it immediately. Something didn't belong. The nurse stepped forward. We need to hurry. Administration is. Emily cut her off. Hold. The nurse blinked. Excuse me. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Who sent you? The nurse hesitated. Just a fraction, Hale noticed. Answer the question. The nurse's gaze flicked to Ethan. I was told. Ethan's voice cut in sharp despite his condition. By who? The nurse swallowed. I don't know. Someone upstairs. Emily's pulse hammered. Upstairs was vague. Too vague. Hale stepped between them. Step out. The nurse hesitated again. Security appeared at the door moments later, summoned without a word spoken. The nurse left, flanked confusion etched across her face. Hale turned back to Ethan, shaken. You weren't exaggerating. No, Ethan said quietly. I was understating. The monitors beeped steadily now. The anesthesiologist looked to Hale for instruction. Hale glanced at Ethan one last time. We're starting. Ethan nodded. As the anesthesia took edge off the pain but not his awareness, Ethan turned his head toward Emily. "You did good," he said. "This isn't over," Emily replied. Ethan's eyes closed, not in surrender but in trust. Outside the OR, the distant helicopter rotors grew louder, and somewhere between the ceiling and the sky, the consequences of one whispered phrase were about to arrive. The operating room doors sealed with a soft hiss that felt far too gentle for what was happening inside. Bright lights flooded the space, bleaching color from everything except the monitors. The steady beep of Ethan Cole's heart rate filled the room, measured and controlled for now. Doctor Hale stood scrubbed in hands, hovering as if weighing not just the incision but the responsibility he had accepted. Minimal sedation, Hale reminded the anesthesiologist. He stays responsive. The anesthesiologist nodded, eyes flicking to Ethan with clear skepticism. That's a first for a case like this. It's not Ethan, murmured, eyes half-lidded. Just not here. Emily took her position beside the table, one hand on the vitals, the other ready with supplies. She could feel the tension in the room, tight, coiled, waiting. Everyone knew this wasn't a normal surgery anymore. Hale took a breath. We begin. The first incision drew blood immediately. Ethan's jaw clenched, his breath hitching once before settling again. He didn't cry out. Didn't flinch. Emily watched his hands. They stayed still. That told her everything. As Hale worked, the OR fell into a rhythm. Commands were clipped. Movements precise. For a brief window, it almost felt normal. Then the questions started. Trajectory suggests close range, a surgical resident said quietly. Do we know the weapon? Emily's head snapped up. Hale paused. That's not relevant. It affects fragmentation patterns, the resident pressed. If it was, Ethan's eyes opened fully. No, he said. The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The resident stiffened. Sir, you were just curious, Ethan finished. Curiosity kills people. The room went silent. Hale shot the resident a warning look. Focus on your task. Emily felt the shift immediately. This was what Ethan had warned her about, not malice, not betrayal, but the dangerous slide from medicine into intelligence. The surgery continued. Minutes stretched. Then, pressures dropping, the anesthesiologist called out. Hale swore under his breath. We've hit the bleed. Suction roared as blood pooled faster than expected. Hale worked quickly, hands steady despite the sudden escalation. Emily leaned in, her voice calm. Ethan, stay with me. Look at me. Ethan's vision swam, but he forced his eyes to lock onto hers. Still here. Hale glanced at Emily. If he loses consciousness, I know, Emily said. But he hasn't. Hale nodded once and went back to work. Outside the OR, the hospital corridors buzzed with a different kind of tension. Security had been quietly doubled. Administrators hovered near phones, voices low and urgent. No one could quite explain why an unscheduled military helicopter was circling the city or why it had refused to identify itself. In the OR, Ethan suddenly inhaled sharply. Hold, he said. Hale froze. What? Your left, Ethan said. You're about to miss it. Hale blinked, then followed Ethan's gaze. A small, nearly invisible vessel pulsed weakly beneath pooled blood. Hale adjusted just in time, clamping it shut. The room exhaled. The anesthesiologist stared at Ethan. How did you seen it? Before Ethan replied faintly, Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't luck. Hale's respect for his patient shifted again, settling into something heavier. All right, he said quietly. You're still with us. But before anyone could relax, the OR doors swung open. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, flanked by hospital security, who looked far less confident than they should have. Dr. Hale, the man said, voice crisp. This procedure needs to stop immediately. Hale turned furious. This is a sterile field. Get out. The man didn't flinch. By order of Ethan spoke. Say it. The man hesitated. Emily felt it like a punch. Hale narrowed his eyes. Say whose order? The man adjusted his tie. This patient is now under federal oversight. Ethan laughed softly, a sound with no humor in it. That's not how this works. The man's gaze hardened. You don't get to decide that. Ethan's breathing grew labored. Blood loss was catching up to him. Emily stepped forward. You're compromising a live surgery. The man looked at her for the first time. And you are, Emily held his gaze. The person making sure he survives long enough to finish what he started. The man scoffed. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Ethan's eyes locked onto the man. I know exactly who you are. The man stiffened. Or rather, Ethan continued, voice weakening but sharp, who you aren't. Hale's patience snapped. Security, remove him. The guards hesitated, then moved. The man backed toward the door, anger flashing across his face. This isn't over, he warned. It never is, Ethan said. The doors sealed again. Silence fell, broken only by the monitors. Emily leaned close to Ethan. Who was that? Ethan swallowed hard. Someone who thinks authority is louder than truth. Hale resumed operating, but his hands were tense now. You just made powerful enemies. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. They were already enemies. The surgery pushed on. Time blurred. Finally, Hale stepped back, exhaustion etched into his face. We've stabilized the bleed. He's not out of danger, but he's alive. A collective breath released. Emily felt her knees threaten to give out relief, crashing over her in waves. But before she could celebrate, a low, distant sound reached her ears. Not inside the hospital. Outside, the unmistakable thump of rotors, closer now. Lower. The anesthesiologist frowned. That helicopter again. Ethan's eyes opened one last time before sedation pulled him under completely. They found me, he murmured. Emily leaned closer. Who did? Ethan's gaze flicked toward the ceiling. My unit. And as the sound grew louder, close enough now to rattle the lights, Emily realized the surgery had only been the first test. The real reckoning was about to land on the roof. The helicopter shook the building before anyone officially acknowledged it. Lights flickered once, then steadied. Dust drifted from the ceiling panels in the surgical corridor outside the OR. A low-frequency thrum rolled through the floor, not the chaotic sound of a news chopper or medevac, but something heavier, disciplined. Purpose-built. Dr. Hale felt it in his chest. That's military, he muttered. Emily stood at Ethan's side as the anesthesiologist adjusted the drip. Ethan was unconscious now, his body finally surrendering to the chemistry that kept him alive. The monitors showed stable vitals for the moment. Barely. Close, Hale said, nodding at the incision. We're closing. As sutures were placed, the doors to the OR opened again, this time not abruptly, but with authority. Hospital security stood aside as a woman in a dark flight suit stepped in her boots, still dusted with rooftop grit. She didn't look around. She looked straight at Ethan. Chief Petty Officer Ethan Cole, she said calmly. Status. Hale bristled. This is a restricted alive, the woman continued, eyes never leaving Ethan. Good. Emily felt her breath catch. The woman turned, then finally acknowledging the room. Her posture was rigid, controlled. No rank insignia were visible, but something about the way she stood made rank irrelevant. I'm Lieutenant Commander Rachel Voss, she said. I'm here to take custody of my operator. Hale stepped forward. This patient is under my care. You don't just walk into an operating room, and Voss held up a hand. Hale stopped mid-sentence. Not because of fear, because of recognition. You did good work, Voss said. We appreciate it. Hale stared at her. Appreciation doesn't override medical authority. No, Voss agreed, but clearance does. She produced a badge, not flashy, not dramatic, just enough. Hale didn't take it. He didn't need to. Emily watched the exchange, heart hammering. This wasn't the triumphant reveal she'd imagined. There was no shouting, no threats, just inevitability. How long has he been here? Voss asked. Too long, Hale replied. Voss nodded. That tracks. She stepped closer to Ethan, her voice dropping. He shouldn't have been alone this long. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. He wasn't, she said before she could stop herself. Voss turned to her. The scrutiny was immediate, sharp, evaluating. And you are... Emily straightened. Emily Carter, ER nurse. Voss studied her for a long moment. You heard the phrase. Emily hesitated. Yes, and responded correctly. Yes. Voss nodded once. Then you did more than your job. Emily didn't know what to say. Hale cleared his throat. He's stable but critical. Internal damage was severe. He'll need monitoring. He'll get it, Voss said. With us. Hale's jaw tightened. He's not going anywhere tonight. Voss met his gaze evenly. We're not moving him. We're securing him. As if on cue, two more figures appeared at the door, silent, efficient scanning. Not soldiers in the traditional sense. No visible weapons. But they moved like men who didn't need them. Emily recognized it instantly. Containment. Why now? Hale asked. If he's that important, why wasn't he escorted here in the first place? Voss's expression darkened, because this wasn't supposed to be public, and because Ethan doesn't ask for extraction unless he has no other option. Emily glanced at Ethan's still form. The calm refusals, the tests, the code phrase. He was buying time, she whispered. Voss looked at her sharply, then nodded. Yes. The room went quiet again. Hale ran a hand through his hair. Someone tried to stop the surgery. Voss's jaw tightened. We know. Who were they? Emily asked. Not who Voss corrected. What? Emily frowned. What does that mean? It means, Voss said carefully, that some people profit when missions fail quietly, and panic when they don't. Hale felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You're telling me this hospital was compromised? Voss didn't answer directly. We're telling you Ethan was right to be careful. Emily thought of the nurse who didn't belong. The vague orders, the hesitation. Her skin prickled. What happens now? Hale asked. Voss glanced at Ethan. Now we wait for him to wake up. As if summoned by the words, a monitor chirped. Ethan's fingers twitched. Emily leaned in immediately. Ethan, can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered. Hey, she said softly. You're still here. His lips moved dry and cracked. Told you. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Emily's mouth. Relief hit her so hard she had to grip the edge of the bed. Voss stepped closer. You gave us a scare. Ethan's eyes cracked open, unfocused but aware. You're late, Voss huffed quietly. You're dramatic. Occupational hazard, Ethan murmured. Hale watched the exchange, realization dawning fully now. You're SEAL. Ethan didn't bother correcting him. Was. Voss shook her head. Always. Ethan's gaze shifted to Emily. She passed. Voss followed his eyes. She did. Ethan exhaled slowly. Good. Emily felt tears threaten, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back. You don't have to test people like that, she said quietly. Ethan's gaze softened. I do. Voss looked between them. He's not wrong. Before Emily could respond, the distant sound of sirens rose outside police media, something else entirely. Voss turned sharply. We need to lock this down. No names, no statements. Hale crossed his arms. You don't get to erase what happened here. Voss met his gaze. We're not erasing it. We're containing it. Emily felt the weight of that word settle over her again. Containment meant protection and secrets. As security coordinated quietly with hospital administration, Ethan's grip tightened weakly around Emily's fingers. Didn't think I'd wake up here, he murmured. You did, Emily said. Against all odds. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Voss. They behaved. Voss smirked. Define behaved. Ethan chuckled softly, then winced. Worth it. Hale shook his head slowly. You risked your life to choose who saved you. Ethan looked at him. I risked my life to make sure the right people survived after me. Silence followed. Emily understood then. This had never been about ego. It had been about fallout. And as the helicopter engines powered down fully above them, settling into quiet readiness, Emily realized the story everyone thought they'd witnessed was only half the truth. Because when Ethan Cole had rejected 18 doctors, he hadn't been defying medicine. He'd been defending something far bigger. And now that his unit had arrived, the hospital would never look at that night the same way again. The hospital shifted into a different mode the moment Lieutenant Commander Voss gave the quiet order. It wasn't announced. No alarms sounded. But doors that were usually open required badges now. Hallways that echoed with hurried footsteps fell strangely silent. Security personnel appeared where none had been before, standing still, watchful, as if they'd always belonged there. Containment had begun. Dr. Hale felt it immediately. Hospitals thrived on transparency, on movement, on controlled chaos. This was something else. This was deliberate restraint. He watched as two members of Voss's team took positions outside the OR, not blocking it, but subtly controlling access. Anyone approaching was met with calm questions and redirected elsewhere without argument. "This is my hospital," Hale said quietly to Voss. "You're changing how it breathes." Voss didn't look away from Ethan, only temporarily. "That's never how it works," Hale replied. Voss finally met his gaze. "Doctor, if this were permanent, you wouldn't be here having this conversation." Emily stood near the foot of the bed, absorbing every detail. She felt like she was standing at the intersection of two worlds, one ruled by policy and ethics boards, the other by necessity and consequences that never made the news. Ethan stirred again, a faint groan escaping him as pain flared despite the medication. Emily was at his side instantly. "Easy. You're stable." Ethan's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then they locked onto hers. "Clock," he rasped. Emily glanced at the wall. 0217. Ethan frowned slightly. "Too late." Voss leaned in. Late for what Ethan swallowed. "Someone will try to clean this up." Hale crossed his arms. "You already had someone interfere." "We removed them." Ethan shook his head weakly. "That was a probe. Not the real move." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "What does the real move look like?" Ethan's gaze drifted toward the ceiling as if he could see beyond it. "Administrative pressure, liability, threats, patient safety concerns. All the words that sound reasonable." Hale stiffened. "You think they'll come through me?" Ethan met his eyes. "I think they already are." As if on cue, Hale's phone vibrated in his pocket. He stared at it for a long second before pulling it out. "Hospital administration," he answered, voice clipped. "Hale." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and unmistakably rehearsed. "Doctor, we need an update on the unidentified patient from the Rooftop incident." Hale glanced at Voss, then at Ethan. "The patient is stable. We're receiving inquiries," the voice continued. "Federal civilian and media. There's concern about protocol deviations." Hale's jaw tightened. "Protocol saved his life." "That remains to be determined," the voice replied smoothly. "For now, we need full transparency." Hale's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll provide a report when the case concludes." There was a pause. "That may not be acceptable." Hale ended the call. Emily watched him closely. "They're pushing." "Yes," Hale said, "and they're good at it." Voss nodded. "This is the part where people fold without realizing it." Hale looked at Ethan. "You planned for this." Ethan's breathing was shallow but steady. "I hoped for it." Emily frowned. "Hoped. If nothing happens," Ethan said, "it means they don't care. That's worse." Voss crossed her arms. "We're tracking communications. Someone's trying to reroute authority." "Can they?" Hale asked. "They can try." Ethan shifted slightly, wincing. "They'll go after the weakest link." Emily's heart skipped. "Who's that?" Ethan's eyes moved to her. "No," Emily said immediately. "I didn't sign anything." "I didn't." That's exactly why Ethan said gently. "You're clean. Untouchable on paper." Hale frowned. "You're suggesting they'll pressure her." "They'll test her," Ethan corrected. "See if she breaks." Emily felt a flush of heat rise in her chest. Fear, anger, resolve everything at once. "I didn't do anything wrong." Ethan nodded. "Which won't matter." Voss's communicator buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked up sharply. "We've got movement. Someone from a federal oversight office is en route." Hale let out a humorless laugh. That didn't take long. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Told you." Minutes later, footsteps echoed in the corridor, measured confident, accompanied by the faint rustle of suits rather than scrubs. A man appeared in the doorway, flanked by hospital legal counsel. He smiled politely. "Dr. Hale. I'm Jonathan Mercer. I believe we spoke earlier briefly." Hale's eyes narrowed. "You were removed from a sterile field." Mercer chuckled lightly. "Misunderstanding. I'm here now in an official capacity." Voss stepped forward. "This area is restricted." Mercer glanced at her, unimpressed. "So am I." He turned his attention to Emily. "And you must be Nurse Carter." Emily's blood ran cold. "Yes," she said evenly. Mercer smiled wider. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about what you heard and what you said." Voss stepped between them. "She's not available." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "I'm afraid she is. This concerns national liability." Emily looked at Ethan. He was watching Mercer with a quiet intensity that made the man shift uncomfortably. "Ask your questions," Ethan said. Mercer smiled, gladly. He turned back to Emily. "Did the patient say anything to you in a language or code you recognized?" Emily inhaled slowly. This was the moment Ethan had warned her about, the moment where truth could be twisted by context. "Yes," she said. Mercer nodded. "And you responded yes." Why? Emily met his gaze. "Because he asked for help." Mercer tilted his head, in a code phrase associated with classified operations. Emily didn't flinch. In a phrase associated with trust. Mercer's smile tightened. "Do you have training in military communications?" "No." "Then how did you recognize it?" Emily paused. Hale's heart pounded. Voss's posture tensed. Emily answered calmly, "Because I've worked with people who speak that way when their lives depend on it." Mercer scribbled a note. "Interesting." Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "You're circling the wrong problem." Mercer looked at him. "Am I?" "Yes," Ethan said. "You're asking how she knew. You should be asking why you didn't." The room went silent. Mercer's jaw tightened. "This isn't about me." "It is," Ethan replied. "Because you showed up without clearance, without understanding, and tried to stop a life-saving procedure." Mercer straightened. "I was acting in the interest of control," Ethan finished. "Not safety." Voss nodded. "We have the logs. Your call came before any official notification." Mercer's eyes flicked to her. "You don't have authority here." Voss smiled thinly. "That's where you're wrong." Before Mercer could respond, Voss's communicator buzzed again. She listened briefly, then looked up. "Your superiors are on the line," she said. "They'd like a word." Mercer hesitated. Just for a second. Ethan saw it. Emily saw it. That hesitation was everything. Mercer took the communicator, turned away, and spoke in hushed tones. When he turned back, his smile was gone. "This conversation is postponed," he said stiffly. "For now." Voss inclined her head. "Wise choice." Mercer glanced at Emily one last time. "This isn't over." Emily held his gaze. "It never is." As Mercer left, the room exhaled, but not in relief. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking him. That was the first wave. Hale frowned. First, Ethan nodded faintly. The next one won't ask questions. Emily felt a chill run through her. Outside, the night pressed in closer against the hospital windows. And somewhere beyond the reach of badges and protocols, people were already deciding what price would be paid for the truth staying exactly where it was. The night deepened around the hospital, thick and watchful. Inside the secured wing, the rhythm changed again, not with panic this time, but with preparation. Doctor Hale stood at the glass partition outside the recovery area, arms folded, eyes tracking every movement around Ethan's bed. The surgery had stopped the bleeding, but survival was still conditional. Every chart, every number on the monitor carried an asterisk. Emily moved quietly between machines, checking lines, documenting vitals, adjusting medications with practiced precision. Her hands were steady now. The fear had burned itself down into focus. Lieutenant Commander Voss spoke softly into her communicator near the door, her words clipped and economical. When she finished, she turned back to Hale. "They're escalating," Voss said, "but not openly." Hale exhaled through his nose. "That's worse." "Yes," Voss agreed, "because it means they're looking for leverage." Emily glanced up. "Leverage on who?" Voss's eyes flicked toward Ethan, then back to Emily. "Everyone." As if summoned by the word, an alarm chirped sharp, urgent. Emily was already moving. BP's dropping, she called out. Heart rate climbing. Hale was at the bedside instantly. "Get labs. Now." Emily drew blood, her movements swift. Ethan's face had gone pale again, a faint sheen of sweat returning to his brow. His eyelids fluttered, the medication no longer enough to keep him fully under. "Ethan," Emily said softly, "stay with me." His eyes opened, unfocused at first. Then they found hers. "Still here," he whispered. "Barely," Hale said bluntly. "You're developing complications. Internal swelling. We may need to go back in." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "No." Hale clenched his jaw. "This isn't a negotiation." "It is," Ethan said, breath hitching. "If you open me again, they'll use it." Voss stepped closer. "Use what?" Time, Ethan replied. "Exposure. Movement." Hale stared at him. "You'll die if we don't intervene." Ethan swallowed hard. "Then, we manage it here." Silence fell. Emily felt at the edge they were standing on, the thin line between medicine and mission, between saving a life and protecting something larger than one body. Hale looked at Emily. Thoughts? She hesitated. This wasn't a question she'd ever expected to be asked, certainly not tonight. "We can stabilize," Emily said carefully. "Aggressive monitoring, anti-inflammatories, controlled pressure support. It's risky, but reopening him is riskier in other ways." Hale studied her face. Not for confidence, he'd seen plenty of that tonight, but for honesty. "She's right," Voss said. "Movement triggers interest." Hale let out a slow breath. "All right, we stabilize." Ethan exhaled a shaky sound that might have been relief. "Thank you." The next hour stretched like a held breath. Emily barely left Ethan's side. She spoke to him when the pain surged, grounding him in the room in the present. Hale adjusted medications, watching the numbers inch toward something resembling stability. Outside the recovery room, Voss's team tightened their perimeter. Phones buzzed. Messages were intercepted. Doors were quietly rerouted. Still, pressure found its way in. A senior hospital administrator arrived, with legal counsel in tow, their expressions grave. "This situation is becoming untenable," the administrator said to Hale. "We have federal officers calling hourly. Media vans are outside. We need to transfer the patient." Hale didn't turn. "No," the administrator stiffened. "Doctor," no, Hale repeated. "He's not stable enough to move. And even if he were, I wouldn't." The administrator's gaze shifted to Voss. "You can't commandeer a civilian hospital." Voss met his eyes calmly. "We're not commandeering. We're cooperating." "Under whose authority?" the administrator demanded. Voss didn't answer. Ethan's voice drifted weakly from the bed. "Mine." Everyone turned. "You're not in a position to," the administrator began. Ethan opened his eyes fully now, pain sharpening his focus. "You're afraid of paperwork." "I'm afraid of consequences," the administrator scoffed. "You're delirious." "Then ask why your phones are ringing," Ethan said. "Ask why people who don't normally care about one wounded operator suddenly care very much." The administrator hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Hale turned, finally facing them. "This patient stays. That's my call." Legal counsel leaned in, whispering urgently to the administrator. A few tense seconds passed. Finally, the administrator nodded stiffly. For now, they left without another word. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Nice timing," she murmured to Ethan. He managed a faint smile. "Had to earn my keep." But the reprieve was brief. Another alarm sounded different this time. External. Voss checked her communicator, her expression hardening. "We've got unauthorized movement on the lower levels. Someone's trying to access patient records." Hale's stomach dropped. "They're inside." Voss nodded. "And they're fast." Emily's mind raced. "What are they after?" "Confirmation," Ethan said quietly. "Names, timelines." "And if they get it?" Emily asked. Ethan's gaze met hers. "People disappear." The words settled like lead. Voss issued rapid instructions into her communicator. Moments later, lights in the corridor dimmed slightly as systems shifted into a restricted mode. Hale stared at her. "You can do that." Voss didn't answer. She was already moving. Emily stayed with Ethan, one hand on his pulse, the other gripping the rail. "You're not allowed to crash," she told him quietly. "Not tonight." Ethan chuckled weakly. "Bossy." "You started it," she said. The minutes crawled. Footsteps echoed somewhere distant, then faded. A voice crackled over Voss's communicator, brief coded. She nodded once, intercepted. "No data breach." Hale sagged slightly against the counter. "Jesus." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, something had shifted. "It's time," he said. Emily frowned. "Time for what?" "For the truth to be acknowledged," Ethan replied. "At least enough of it." Voss stepped back into the room. "You're sure?" Ethan nodded. "They won't stop testing boundaries until they hit something solid." Hale looked between them. "What are you planning?" Ethan's voice was steady now, despite the pain. "To stop being the quiet variable." Voss met his gaze. "Once you do this, there's no putting it back." "I know," Ethan said. "But I'm tired of bleeding in the dark." Emily felt a strange swell of emotion, fear, pride, something like awe. She squeezed Ethan's hand gently. "Whatever you're about to do," she said, "do it after you heal." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's the plan." Outside the room, the helicopter engines spun up again, not to leave, but to signal readiness. The sound rolled through the building, impossible to ignore. Hale looked out the window at the dark sky beyond. "You realize," he said quietly, "that this night will change this hospital." Ethan nodded. "It already has." Emily glanced around the tightened security, the hushed voices, the fragile calm built on trust rather than authority. She realized then that the climax wasn't coming with gunfire or shouted orders. It was coming with acknowledgement, and as the hospital braced itself for the final turn of the night, Emily understood that the hardest part wasn't keeping Ethan alive. It was deciding what kind of truth the world was ready to hear once he woke up again. Morning crept toward the hospital without ceremony. No sunrise touched the recovery wing windows. No birdsong filtered through the reinforced glass. Time was measured instead by vitals, stabilizing in fractions by the soft exchange of coded phrases between Voss's team, by the slow return of color to Ethan Cole's face. Emily noticed it first. His breathing evened out, not shallow, not forced, just steady. The kind of rhythm that told a nurse the body had stopped fighting itself. She checked the monitors again, then again, unwilling to trust the quiet. "BP's holding," she said softly. Dr. Hale leaned over the chart, eyes narrowing as he scanned the numbers. "Heart rate's down. Oxygen saturation improving." He looked up at Emily. He might actually pull through. Emily felt her throat tighten. He already did. Hale didn't argue. Across the room, Lieutenant Commander Voss watched from the shadows, arms folded, posture relaxed for the first time all night. She spoke quietly into her communicator, then nodded once. "Perimeter's clear," she said. "No further intrusion attempts." Someone made a call. Hale raised an eyebrow. "A call from who?" Voss glanced at Ethan. "From someone who understands leverage cuts both ways." Ethan stirred. Emily leaned forward instantly. "Ethan." His eyelids fluttered, then opened fully. This time there was no confusion in his eyes, no haze. Just exhaustion and clarity, hard won. "Hey," Emily said. "You're back." Ethan inhaled slowly. "Did I miss anything?" Hale snorted. "You nearly died." Again. Ethan's lips twitched faintly. "Figures." Voss stepped closer. "How do you feel, Ethan?" Considered the question carefully. "Like I got hit by a truck." Then argued with it. Emily let out a shaky laugh before she could stop herself. Ethan's gaze softened when it landed on her. "You stayed. Someone had to keep you honest," Emily said. He nodded once. "You did more than that." Hale cleared his throat. "Before we get sentimental, there are consequences we need to discuss." Ethan shifted slightly, wincing but staying present. "I figured." Hale pulled a stool closer. "The surgeon who tried to override your consent. He's been suspended pending review. The administrator who pushed for your transfer reassigned." Emily blinked. "That fast," Voss answered. "Pressure works both ways when the right people apply it." Hale nodded. "There's also an internal audit underway. Questions are being asked, the kind that don't usually get asked." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Good." Emily frowned. "Good. Yes," Ethan said. "It means they're finally looking in the right direction." Voss studied him. "You're sure you want this?" Ethan met her gaze. "I didn't come here to disappear quietly." Hale leaned back, crossing his arms. "You forced a lot of hands tonight." Ethan's voice was calm. "I gave people a choice. They showed their cards." Emily thought of the hesitation she'd seen, tiny, almost invisible, but decisive. She understood now what Ethan had been testing all along. "Why 18?" she asked quietly. Ethan turned to her. "Because I needed to be sure." "Of what?" "That the pattern wasn't random," he said. 18 is enough to reveal intent." Hale stared at him. "You rejected 18 doctors while bleeding internally." "To confirm a pattern," Ethan nodded. "I needed to know whether curiosity outweighed restraint." And Emily asked. "And it did," Ethan said. "Every time." The room fell silent. Hale exhaled slowly. "That's disturbing." "It's human," Ethan replied. "Most people don't realize when they cross the line. They think the line moves for them. Emily felt a chill. And I didn't, Ethan shook his head. You didn't try to cross it. You waited for permission. Voss smiled faintly. That's why you passed. Emily swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to pass anything. I know, Ethan said. That's why it mattered. Hale stood, running a hand through his hair. So, what happens now? Ethan looked between them. Now the truth gets documented. Carefully. Voss nodded. A redacted report will be filed. Enough to explain the interference. Enough to justify the actions taken. And the rest? Hale asked. Ethan's gaze hardened slightly. The rest stays buried. Where it belongs. Emily frowned. Is that justice? Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. Justice isn't always exposure. Sometimes it's containment. She absorbed that uneasy but understanding. Voss checked her watch. We'll move him to a secure recovery unit within the hour. Hale stiffened. He's not leaving my hospital until I say so. Ethan raised a hand weakly. Doctor, it's okay. Hale looked at him sharply. You trust them more than us, Ethan shook his head. I trust you because you chose medicine over authority. Hale held his gaze, then nodded once. Fair. Emily felt something settle inside her, a quiet recognition. This wasn't about choosing sides. It was about choosing principles. As preparations began, a junior nurse hesitated in the doorway, eyes wide. There are reporters outside asking about the helicopter. Hale sighed. Of course there are. Voss smirked slightly. We'll handle it. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Keep it boring. Voss nodded. Always. Emily helped adjust the bed as equipment was prepared for transport. As she worked, Ethan reached out again, catching her wrist lightly. Emily, he said. She leaned in. Yeah, you know they're going to ask you questions, he said. Over and over. She nodded. I figured. They'll try to make you doubt yourself. I won't, she said. Ethan studied her face. Why? Because I know what I heard, Emily replied. And I know why I answered. Ethan's grip tightened just slightly. Good. Hale watched the exchange, something like pride flickering across his face. You handled yourself well tonight. Emily looked at him surprised. Thank you, sir. Hale shook his head. Just Hale. As the gurney was prepared to move, the room filled with quiet efficiency. No drama, no speeches, just people doing what needed to be done. At the threshold, Ethan paused figuratively, if not physically, his gaze lingering on the recovery room that had become a battlefield of a different kind. Doctor, he said to Hale, you asked earlier why I tested everyone. Hale nodded. I did. Ethan met his eyes. Because when the wrong people learn the wrong things, the cost isn't measured in lawsuits. It's measured in lives. Hale absorbed that, then nodded once. I won't forget this night. Ethan's gaze shifted to Emily. Neither should you. She met his eyes steadily. I won't. As the gurney rolled out, escorted by Voss's team, Emily stood back watching until Ethan disappeared down the corridor. The hospital began to exhale at last, but Emily knew something had changed. Because once you heard a code phrase meant for silence and answered it, you didn't go back to being just a bystander. And as dawn finally reached the city beyond the hospital walls, Emily Carter understood that recognition wasn't always loud. Sometimes it arrived quietly. And it stayed. The hospital returned to its normal rhythm by late morning. Monitors beeped in familiar patterns. Stretchers rolled through corridors with practiced urgency. Coffee cups appeared at nursing stations like small anchors of routine. To anyone walking in fresh, it looked like any other day. But for those who had been there through the night, the air still felt different. Emily noticed it in the way people spoke more quietly. In how Doctor, Hale paused before giving orders, listening just a second longer than he used to. In how security officers nodded to her now, not out of friendliness but respect. Ethan Cole had been moved before sunrise. No announcement, no spectacle, just a secure transfer handled with the same efficiency that had defined everything since the helicopter landed. One moment his bed was there, the next it was empty, the sheets already stripped and replaced. Only the faint smell of antiseptic and the memory of his steady gaze remained. Emily stood at the nursing station finishing her charting when Dr. Hale approached. You should go home, he said. You've been up for nearly 20 hours. Emily nodded, but didn't move. I will. Just finishing this. Hale studied her for a moment. You did well. She glanced up. You already said that. Yes, Hale replied. But this time I mean something different. She waited. You didn't just follow instinct, Hale continued. You accepted responsibility. That's rarer than talent. Emily swallowed. It didn't feel heroic. Hale gave a small, tired smile. It never does when it's real. A pause settled between them, comfortable, reflective. They'll write reports, Hale added. Committees will review them. Words like unusual and exceptional circumstances will get used. And the truth, Emily asked. Hale shrugged. The truth will exist in the margins, where it usually does. Emily nodded slowly. As Hale walked away, Emily felt the weight of the night finally catch up to her. She grabbed her bag, changed out of her scrubs, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, sharp with exhaust and early sunlight. Across the street, a news van idled, its logo already peeling. A reporter spoke animatedly into a camera, gesturing toward the hospital behind her. Emily didn't stop to listen. She walked past, unnoticed. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Emily Carter, a calm voice, said when she answered, "Yes, this is Lieutenant Commander Rachel Voss." Emily straightened instinctively. "Is Ethan? He's stable," Voss said, recovering, stubborn as ever. Relief flooded Emily's chest. "Good. There's something else," Voss continued. "He asked me to thank you." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "You don't have to," he insisted, Voss said. "And he wanted you to know something." Emily waited. "He didn't reject 18 doctors because they were unqualified," Voss said. "He rejected them because they tried to take control before they earned trust." Emily thought back to the raised voices, the assumptions, the hands reaching without permission. "And me?" Emily asked quietly. "You waited," Voss said. "That mattered." The line went silent for a beat. "You won't hear from us again," Voss added. "That's intentional." "I understand," Emily replied. Before hanging up, Voss spoke one last time. "If anyone ever asks what happened that night." Emily didn't hesitate. "I treated a patient." Voss smiled. Emily could hear it. "Exactly." The line went dead. Days passed. The hospital investigation concluded quietly. No press conference. No public fallout. A few names disappeared from schedules. A few policies were rewritten with language that emphasized consent, restraint, and escalation procedures. Emily's life on the surface went back to normal. She worked her shifts. She learned. She made mistakes and corrected them. She laughed with coworkers. She went home exhausted and slept deeply. But something inside her had shifted. She listened more. She spoke less. And when patients refused care not in fear but in conviction, she didn't dismiss them. She asked why. Weeks later, during a night shift, much like the one that had started everything, Emily passed the trauma bay where Ethan had first arrived. The bed was occupied by someone else now. Different story, different pain. But the silence felt familiar. Emily paused just for a moment. She remembered the phrase, not the words themselves, but what they meant. Trust before action. Understanding before authority, human lives before systems. She realized then that Ethan Cole hadn't come to the hospital just to survive. He had come to draw a line, and for once the line had held. Emily adjusted her badge and stepped back into the flow of the ER, just another nurse on another shift. But now she knew something most people never learned, that the loudest power in the room isn't rank, it isn't expertise, it isn't control. It's the quiet courage to wait, to listen, and to answer, only when you're sure your voice belongs. And somewhere recovering far from cameras and questions, a wounded SEAL was alive, because one rookie nurse understood that truth and spoke when it mattered most. Sometimes the most dangerous moments aren't marked by chaos, but by confidence. By people who are certain they're right, certain they're entitled, certain the rules bend for them. This story isn't about rejecting doctors. It's about choosing who to trust when the cost of being wrong is measured in lives. True professionalism isn't loud. True authority doesn't rush. And true courage often shows up in the quietest person in the room, the one willing to listen before acting. If this story moved, you tell us in the comments what moment stood out to you most. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe for more powerful, human stories where respect is earned and silence speaks volumes.